Here we are back to Brighty of the Grand Canyon. We're at the next chapter, which is Curious First Aid. Remember, he got attacked by that mountain lion. There we go. See if I keep from knocking this over. All the next day, Brighty lay in misery. He kept biting at his cuts, trying to quiet the throbbing, but the gashes only widened and the burning pain ran up his legs. He moaned tiredly, and from time to time sank into half sleep. He was too weak to eat, and he would not go near the tainted pool to drink. Night came again, with the whirling thunder of the doves, and then sunrise, with the hummingbirds drinking all of the droplets as they fell. Out of the weary fog of his mind, Brighty saw a spry-legged figure enter the cave, hearing a familiar voice cry, "Brighty, bright angel!" A wave of memory swept over him. He tried to fix his eyes on the little man wearing a black hat, but the whole figure rippled like something underwater. Even the voice had a tremble in it. "Brighty," Uncle Jim was saying as he stared at the hoof marks and the claw marks, "you must have had a mighty tussle." And in an instant he was on his knees, gently parting the blood-matted hair, examining the wounds. "These rips is bad, feller, mighty bad. But I'll pick us some globs of pine gum and make a quick salve. We'll soon take the burn out of them angry cuts." And as he stood up, he looked for a moment to the pool. "Willikers," he whistled, "a big cougar. She's 6 feet or more. 'Pears to me you wrestled her into the water and drowned her. How'd you do it, feller?" Brighty's eyes watched the little man as he made a cup of his hands to catch the dripping water. It wasn't a very good cup. It leaked, but still it held enough to feel cool as it went down Brighty's throat. He closed his eyes while his ears flickered to remembered sounds, twigs being broken, and after a while, fire crackling. Then came the pungent sharpness of pine tar in his nostrils. "Now, boy," Uncle Jim explained while he poured the resin into Brighty's cuts, "she may hurt a little, but I got to do her." He bent over the burrow and began working the salve into the open sores. "You had me uneasy as an old biddy hen," he went on. "The warm rains come and the spring flowers, and I says to myself, Bright Angel be here next any day now, but you didn't come and you didn't, and then I commences to fret and stew, and finally I set out to hunt you." The thick, warm fluid did not hurt at all. It felt soothing, and the voice of Uncle Jim was something to hold to, like a rock in a flood time. Brighty let out a great sigh of relief and lifted his head a bit as if life were good again. Uncle Jim stood up, and suddenly he was regarding his overalls as if he'd never noticed them before. "I have an idea," he crowed, his eyes twinkling in triumph. He took out his pocket knife and pierced the denim just above one knee. Then he cut his way through his pant legs and stepped out of it. "You see, boy," he said, if we hide your cuts, you can't pick at them so easy, and they'll heal nice and clean." He began cutting off his other trouser leg, chuckling to himself as he worked. He stepped out of that too. "Let me see now, what was invented before buttons?" He thought a moment. "Why, pegs, of course." He broke off several twigs and sharpened each to a fine point. "We'll just peg your pants on." Next, he laid his own bright red suspenders on Brighty's shoulders and slipped the pant legs over the tiny hooves and up the torn legs, taking great care to hold the cloth away from the wounds. "How about that?" he exclaimed, pegging the suspenders in place. He stood back, admiring the effect. "Now you feel better, boy? Just you rest a bit whilst I see about what's in the pool." That's funny, just having the picture of Brighty wearing overalls or something like that. Brighty sniffed the old blue denim and felt a strange easing. He stretched his legs out stiffly and sat up on his haunches, watching as Uncle Jim hauled the heavy body of the lion from the pool. After he'd removed the paws, he dragged the carcass to the lip of the cave and with great effort flung it into the chasm. From out of nowhere, 3 ravens came cawing and swooping down after it. "The only good lion's a dead 'un," Uncle Jim said, scrubbing his hands with sand. He fastened the lion's paws to the trunk of the dead tree and painstakingly carved the name of Brighty into the bark. "In all Arizona," he said, "I figure there ain't another little old burro smart enough to kill a cougar. You deserve a marker." It was a strange-looking pair that left the cave. and slow-footed toward Uncle Jim Owen's cabin in the edge of the meadow. But there was no one to see the old man in his cut-off pants, showing two white legs bowed as powder horns. And there was no one to see the shaggy burro limping along after him, his pant legs swinging like a sailor's bell-bottoms. No one to see? No human beings, that is, but everywhere wide, unblinking eyes stared, and eyes of deer and cottontail rabbits and squirrels and grouse and jays. There was no visible tie rope between the man and the burro, but it was there all the same, a tie rope of such stuff as could never thin out and break apart. On the mend. That's the next one. See, on the mend. Look at the pant legs. See that? While Brighty's wounds healed, he grazed stiff-leggedly in Uncle Jim Owen's meadow. He saw little of Uncle Jim during the day, for in all Kabob Forest no man was busier. Hunting parties came to the wily summer camp nearby, rough and rugged men, eager to hunt mountain lion, and it was Uncle Jim who served as their guide. He fitted big men to big mules and little men to little mules, and besides hunting, he lent a hand when things needed doing at Wiley's camp. But night times belonged to Brighty. Then he was the center of things, and everything happened around him. Uncle Jim came home riding a white mule with a train of riderless mules behind him and a pack of yelping footsore hounds. Brighty went limping each night to greet them, braying a lusty welcome home as he went. When the mules had been fed and bedded down, the hounds cared for, he would nudge Uncle Jim toward the cabin. "Sure tickles me, Brighty," Uncle Jim would say, laugh softly. "The way you hustles me along seems like I'm your critter, 'stead of the other way around." While he prepared supper over the cook stove inside, Brighty waited outside in nervous eagerness, pawing and stomping the earth. Then, after supper, he tailed Uncle Jimmy from one ponderosa pine to another as he gathered yellow lumps of resin. "You'll make her," Uncle Jimmy would say every night as he melted the gum and stirred it with his finger. "Yep," he would nod, pouring the warm gum into each gash. "Soon you'll be going lickety-larrup up again. What's more, your hair'll grow long enough so hardly a scar'll show." Brighty always sat for this performance, his tail stretched along the ground behind him like a piece of rope. He enjoyed the whole business of having his wounds dressed. He even got into the habit of lifting one forefoot and then another, stepping into the pant legs like a child trying to dress himself. As for the suspenders, he was growing used to them too. They gave with every motion and rubbed pleasantly across his shoulders at an itchy spot he could never reach himself. "Get along with him, Brighty," Uncle Jim pronounced when his nursing was done each evening. "I got my cabin to tidy up." Brighty lopped off then to tend to his own business. There was a big chunk of red salt inside the mule corral, and by poking his head between the rails, he could get a good look at it. He had worn a sizable trough and always had his tongue grooved the same place, licking in slapping rhythm. Meanwhile, the white mule worked on the other side of the chunk as if trying to meet Brighty halfway. It was a routine they went through every night. Afterward, Brighty walked all around the corral, cleaning up wisps of hay that the mules had let fall over the fence. Not since his fight with the cougar had he slept in his cave in the mountain. He was content to hug the meadow where he could hear the mules snoring and the comforting noises from the cabin. Uncle Jimmy singing cowboy songs and dumping dishwater out of the door, sometimes just missing him by a hair. One night, instead of cooking supper over a stove, Uncle Jim built a fire out of doors. Brighty watched the sourdough being pinched off into mouth-sized pieces and laid in a neat pattern in the Dutch oven. "Bet this minds you of old-timer, don't it, Brighty?" The burro saddled closer, asking to have his back scratched. With a flowery hand, Uncle Jimmy obliged. "Lucky thing, no women folk about," he said. "They'd squeak like mice at my cooking and scratching your lousy little old self all the time at the same time." Brighty leaned his weight against his friend, enjoying the moment. "What women don't know," Uncle Jim confided, "is that a flea'd rather cling to a passel of fur than a boiled biscuit. Eh, Brighty?" A grunt came in reply. "Sometimes it appears to me I needs your company a sight worse than you needs mine. Daytimes I'm too busy to mull about things, but when night comes, my mind fastens on old-timer, and I gets a sad, pinched-up feeling." He paused in his rubbing and took off old-timer's hat, looking at it as if he could see the white head of hair and twinkling blue eyes it used to shade. "We ain't forgot you old-timer," he said. "It's just that your killer's so slippery. We know he's hiding somewhere in the canyon, probably just waiting to take over your mine." He turned now to Brighty, an angry light in his eyes. "But me and you'll round him up if it's the last thing we do." A night moth settled on the black hat, and Uncle Jim flipped it away. "Money don't mean a tinker to us, old-timer. A reward's been offered for the villain, but every cent'll go to help little Mimi. You'll see." This night, when supper was done, Uncle Jimmy did not go off gathering pine resin. He took out his knife and slit open Brighty's frayed pant legs. Then he threw them into the fire. Black smoke curled upward, and the smell of pine gum filled the air. "There, partner," Uncle Jimmy said, his voice suddenly grown husky. "You're free. Free as that night bird winging out over the canyon. Go on, feller, take off." Brighty looked down at his bare legs with the new hairs covering his scars and let out a wild bray. He struck off for the corral and high-stepped around it like some show pony. Then back he came at a gallop, sliding to a stop in front of Uncle Jim. The man laughed, and then he felt a little glow of pride rising in him. "How often," he asked, his eyes on the fire and one hand working hard at his mustache, "how often do I get to tell you, feller? I ain't one to hang on you. Goodbye, Brighty. You're free." But Brighty lingered. It seemed as if he wanted to square accounts for the long weeks of nursing. One early morning, when Uncle Jim came out of the cabin carrying his water tins, Brighty blocked his path, almost asking to be put to work. Anyone else might have brushed the little feller aside with a laugh. "Yeah, I know, you'll run off with my tins, and I'll waste the whole day tracking you." But Uncle Jim thought a second, and his eyes lit up with pleasure. He went into the cabin for a shoulder strap, and then packed the tins on Brighty. He started up the path to a small spring on the hillside, and while he trudged on ahead, he rummaged in his mind, trying to find some reason for the change in Brighty. "Maybe," he mused to himself, "it's like what happened to that kid who had to have his hair shaved off. Straight as string it was, but when it growed back after the fever, I'll be danged if it didn't kink out all over his head like tendrils on a morning glory vine. Maybe," he concluded, some critters changes characters after a sickness instead of looks. Now you take Brighty's fight with the she lion. Could it have been a settling influence on his character? Uncle Jim faced round to make sure that Brighty was following. Yes, there he was, head bent to the climb, as if fetching water was the prime thought of his life. The old man nodded, answering his own question. "That's the way I see it." He sighed a little as he took the tins from Brighty's back and plunged one after another into the spring. "Feller," he said, shaking his head, "I'm mighty obliged for the help, but don't you get too domesticated on me now." There you go. That was Brighty of the Grand Canyon. More later. Bye.